So we're going to talk about change management, where it works, and how it could be done better on projects. This is our webinar series, How to Fix Any Project. This is the 5th in our webinar series, Change Management, What It Does Well and Where It Misses the Mark. Who am I? For those who don't know me, and why am I talking about this here today? My name is Katrina McCullough. I am the founder and CEO of McCullough Management. We are a firm that specializes in digital project management. Essentially, if it has a screen and requires a keyboard, we can help you implement it. I have 18 years of project leadership experience. I've completed over 100 projects, 100% project success rate, over $250 million in project budgets. I am also, and it's not on here, a ProSci certified change manager. I have spent my career being a project fixer. So I go into projects that have failed or are failing and help them across the finish line. And I wanted to take my expertise and put that into a framework that could be used by others. But if we're going to talk about how to fix projects, then we have to talk about how they should be run to begin with. So the 5 pillars of project management, of excellent project management, these are in a specific order, starting with ensuring you have the right team, ensuring that you have a culture of digital innovation, the invisible structures, including the project infrastructure, cadence, and communication. Last session, we talked about requirements and testing, what I lovingly refer to as the bookends that break projects. And that takes us down to change management, the final in the series, which is critical on projects and also could be done better. All right, so we're going to start with 2 truths. And as you read this slide, I want to preface this by saying, I believe in change management. I think that change management is important on projects. I am ProSci certified, like I said. I believe in the infrastructure of it. I do believe change management took communication best practices. We might call those communication common sense and emotional intelligence, and then built a framework around it. And many projects have gone live without that formal change management framework in place. And I know that's true because the first time that I worked with an organizational change manager was 2017, and I had had over a decade of successful projects before then. So why does that matter? It changes how change managers interact with project management. It changes how they adapt their framework, and it changes how they impact culture. Because you're not bringing something new to the table that never existed before. There's a best practice way to do it, but there's change management that has already existed on projects. Otherwise, projects would never have gone live successfully. So the methodology works. It provides structure, it provides language, it provides that human-centered lens on projects. And it helps with the sequencing, right? So if you don't have that common sense, and I'm sure many of you can agree that common sense is often not common, then you do have kind of a step-by-step methodology that you can use that's going to be far and away better than if you didn't have it. You have people speaking the common language. What is a stakeholder, a sponsor, a change impact summary, the communication plan, the nuances of that. And every project is done in support of people. So you have that human-centered lens on it. And of course, there is a good order of operation. We can do things out of order on projects, and the order matters. And so that's why I like the methodology. Whether it's ProSci and you're following ADKAR or it's some other methodology, I believe in the structure of it. I also think that change managers do get aspects of their role wrong on projects. So here are the 5 of them that we're going to talk about today. Ensuring that the projects make sense and they're built on best practices. Assuming no change management exists. Serving the framework instead of solving the problem. Operating in isolation from the project team. And expecting or misreading resistance. All right, so we'll jump right into it. Problem number 1, you can't manage change built on the wrong information. So, first question, do we actually know what the problem is? Are we solving the right problem? Second question is, have we done the work we need to do to ensure that we're actually solving it with the right solution? Once we've done that, is it designed for real use? Were the requirements and the development done correctly? And does it work properly? Was it adequately tested before we put it out there in the marketplace? You can't have change management if you have not said yes, if you do not have those in place. which is a given. But what I find is that change managers don't often have as vested an interest in some of these aspects of project management. So I have a story for you. There was, and this is so common, and I think so many of us have been on projects that have had this happen. There was one of the big projects I'm working right now. The organization has these proprietary systems that were homegrown that are over 20, 30, 40 years old. And because of that, of course, there's a lot of shadow systems. There's a lot of Google Sheets and spreadsheets and Excel and Google Forms. And one of the senior executives had gone to a conference and he saw software that offered all of these one-click executive dashboards, drill down into all of your data, really beautiful reports. And he came back and said, that's it. This is what we're getting. This is what we need. This is what we've been missing. Now, my client's government institution, which means we had to go to a formal RFP process. They brought us in to do the requirements. We did exhaustive requirements gathering. In HR alone, we had over 1,000 requirements. When we went to the formal RFP, the same company that he saw that sparked this whole project didn't even bid on the RFP because they could not do a fraction of what we were actually asking for. So luckily for us, we found a system that would actually meet all of our needs. Now, had we worked in a private institution, that executive could have come back and said, great, this is it. This software is amazing. And then forced the company to shoehorn into that system, which wouldn't have worked. Change management is not going to fix that problem. There's no change management that's going to help with a system that doesn't make any sense. So good project management work is change management work. 50% of change management is actually making sure that you're solving the right problem with the right solution. And then making sure that the right folks are actually in the room when you're doing requirements gathering, actually making sure that you have the correct SMEs in the room. When you look at why projects fail, requirements gathering and testing, that's why we had a whole session on them a month ago, are the number one reason why projects fail. So change managers, if your job is to ensure adoption, you have a vested interest in these happening. You have a vested interest in who's sitting in the room, that they're sitting in process validation, that it's actually getting built well, and that it's being tested well. And then that allows you to go out to your end users when you're communicating and say, look, this was built by your peers. This was tested by your peers. And this is going to matter so much more in fix number 3 when we talk about culture. Because if you have a culture where there was some change management that existed, that's going to go so much further. So change management is not a separate track from project work. It's happening the second the project starts. Okay, this one's a big one for me. This one is a hot ticket item for me, and that is assuming that no change management exists. If it doesn't follow the framework, if it's not ProSci, if it's not one of the other ones out there, then it doesn't count, then it's not real change management. So I get fundamentally insulted by this because, again, that goes back to the idea that projects have gone live without change management. And when I hear statements like, change management is part of the reason why projects aren't successful, I do think that's true. I do believe in the change management framework. I would push back on that, and I would venture to guess that the projects that didn't have some form of communication and change management probably were lacking in those fundamental project management best practices as well. And again, you are never going to convince people to adopt a system that just doesn't work. So what do you do then? You start by asking. You ask people, have you gone through a major digital implementation before? What percentage of employees were impacted? And if it was a small percentage, to what degree were they impacted? Was it an entire system? Did they fundamentally change the way they did business? Because those are huge changes. And if the answer to that was that they did have successful implementations, then they already and the systems were adopted, then they have frameworks in place. They have the communication best practices. They have that emotional intelligence in place. They know their people. They know what works. They know what to leverage. They know who to push and pull. So where I get a little frustrated is when a change manager will come in and see, especially a consultant, will see that there's been some solid change management in the past, and then almost in essence ignore it and lob a framework on top of it. Well, that's great, but here's, 17 different deliverables we need you to fill out from scratch, as opposed to, okay, well, let's take a look at what you have. Let's leverage what you've done. Let's not spin up a whole bunch of different committees with different names that no one's ever heard of before if what you have, in fact, has already worked. How do we leverage your reputation within the organization? Because if you've done this before, then you have a culture. If you've had successful implementations before, then there are people out there that already trust you as the business lead or the project manager, or whomever it is in the organization that has done those. And the thing I want to stress is that you have to validate that broadly, because different people you ask are going to give you different answers. You could go to a C-suite executive and ask, and they may have no memory of a huge initiative that went live several years earlier, because that's, especially an IT initiative, that might not be where they're thinking. And then you'll ask the business lead who managed it or the project manager who managed it. So my advice is always let the data speak for itself. Let the artifacts speak for themselves. Do you have, what was their communication that went out? Was there training that went out? Were there checklists? Like, what was it that you have? You as the change manager can take a look at that and leverage that, because you don't need the whole framework for every project. We're going to talk about that next. You can tailor the framework to the organization. So you want to build on those, you want to build on that infrastructure, you want to build on the strengths of an organization. And there are so many accidental change managers that I've worked with in the past that I thought were brilliant at understanding the end users, understanding what they were going to need, putting together a complete communication roadshow, workflow, training, including people like the assistant director of payroll or an office supervisor, when I worked at Toyota, the senior manager of product education. We have some training and development folks on the call, who better to know an organization than those who have been out there training them, to have their finger on the pulse of that organization. So we need to be leveraging the expertise of those people within organizations. Of course, there's so many project managers that are natural change managers as well, or had the formal training. Problem number 3, we're serving the framework instead of solving problems. So it feels to me, after working on many projects with change managers, especially if they come in as consultants or if change management is its own track or its own department within an organization, as opposed to having some folks that maybe in your business team get trained in change management. So they really built a lane for themselves, and they've kind of walled themselves off. So real cultural and departmental dysfunction gets missed because it's outside of the framework. They're so focused on a stakeholder analysis and change management plan, but there are things that are happening underneath that if you don't have your finger on the pulse of that, then you're missing it. When I got ProSci trained, our trainer said, look, we're going to give you the Cadillac of change management. We're going to give you every tool that we have ever used. We do not advise that you use all those tools on every project. You need to have enough emotional intelligence, enough communication common sense to know what needs the full suite of change management and what needs the skinny down version. How ready are people for this change? How many times have people had this change? You have to be adaptable over rigidity. Even ProSci said that. Adaptability to the methods and the ability to pivot, those are among the fastest growing contributors to change success. However, I find change managers to often be the least adaptable on some projects. So really being able to grow their skills with being able to be scrappy. And then know one best approach. So again, that goes to meeting people where they are. So if the goal is to increase adoption, if the goal is to ensure adoption and to increase adoption, part of what I think change management needs to do is to have an understanding of where adoption broke down to begin with, because you can't always just blame it on outdated software. So for example, right now in an organization that I'm working with, the HR department, they have a system that was built, was proprietary, homegrown system in Oracle. And they over time have started using Google Forms, Google Sheets, Adobe. So they're having a lot of manual entry because, of course, none of those systems have the employee information in them. So they're getting the employee information out of their system and then using these ancillary systems. if you were to, even though the system actually has a module for what they're out there doing using Google and Excel. And if you were to ask IT, well, why is that happening? IT would say one of three things. Number one, I didn't even know we had a system that did that. Number two, because it was built so long ago. Number two, I had no idea they weren't using it. Number three, I've never heard, all they have to, I thought they were using it. Why haven't they asked us? Why aren't they using it? And so, when you go to HR and you ask them the same questions, they'll say, well, we've had policy changes, we've had department changes, and when we go and ask IT to make those necessary changes in the system so we can keep using it, they're busy, they don't get back to us, they don't understand what we're asking for, it's too hard to work with them, there's no formal intake process. Well, that's not going to change in the new system. That's a cultural dysfunction. In a new system, even if it's a SaaS product, even if it's a cloud-based product, there's still configurations and security and certain things that have to be done by the IT department. So you as the change manager, even if you tee that up to the project manager or the project lead or the sponsor, your job, I feel, is to uncover some of those key cultural divides so that you can be making sure there's a process in place. So in the future, and a system is a great catalyst for that. A new system is a great catalyst to ensure that you're actually fixing some of these cultural divides that are in organizations. And so making sure that they change their intake process, or they change their ticketing system, or there's more of an understanding among the leaders of these different departments on how they're going to be working with each other. Because there's an informal organization and there's a formal organization, as we all know. And I feel like change management follows the formal organization, the hierarchy, your sponsors, your leads, your stakeholders, your subject matter experts, your end users, wherever bucket that they fall into. But then there's that informal organization. Those are the people who have a lot of influence, even if they don't have the title. Those are the people who, and if you have your finger on the pulse of that organization, which can only come by really sitting in the meetings, taking a seat at the table, not treating yourself as though you're a separate work stream, sitting in the requirements gathering sessions, participating in testing as best you can, and if you can't, spending more time with the people who do. I also find, tagging onto this one, that a lot of the change managers I've met most recently haven't had a lot of other roles on projects. So if you haven't had a lot of other roles on projects, you lack a little of the context and perspective of running a project holistically. I started on the business end. I was in marketing, and I worked with our IT department. And so the IT was serving the needs of my department, and I worked with them in that capacity. And then I flipped over to IT. And I've been a business systems analyst, I've been a QA lead, I've been, all sorts of roles. I even did software design until I finally got into project management. And so I know all the different aspects of organizations. I know what it feels like to be on the vendor side. I know what it feels like to be on the client side. I know what it feels like to be in IT. I know what it feels like to be in the business. And that's where you get part of that communication intelligence. And so obviously, if you've been a change manager, I would never say, okay, now go be a project manager or now go be a business systems analyst. I'm just saying better align with them. Get to understand how they do what they do. Get to understand what they're seeing. Have a vested interest in what they're experiencing, because that will impact how you're communicating. Flows right in. In isolation. So this one I'm focusing primarily on the deliverables themselves. If any of you have worked on a project and you've gotten that communication plan or a change impact summary, I find sometimes the change managers will gather a bunch of information, then they'll go to a meeting by themselves, they'll finish it, and then they'll bring it back. So put yourself in the shoes of, let's say, an accounting manager who is the business lead on a project. They suddenly get back a 100-line Excel spreadsheet that maps out all the communication, and you say, okay, well, does this look right? Does this look how you're going to communicate? What are they going to say? Sure. That looks great. Unless you walk them line by line, which I thoroughly encourage, but why do that? Why not just build it together? So I'm a huge fan of working sessions. If you've been to any of my other webinars, I fundamentally believe in working sessions. They make projects take longer, but the deliverables, when they're done, are usable. there's buy-in, they're actionable, there's an understanding of them, I will die on the hill of working sessions. So to me, if you're doing a communication plan, you have the project manager who has all the project milestones. You have the change manager, the business lead, a business systems analyst because they know some of the features and functionality. They have deep, intimate knowledge of that. Possibly you have the training person there, especially so they can kind of get an understanding. And then you are mapping that out together. You are mapping out the communication plan together based on the milestones. And the communication plan is tied to the project plan. So if the project plan changes, which it probably will, the communication plan can ebb and flow along with the project plan. And now that business lead, who's probably ultimately responsible for communication, ultimately responsible for adoption after the project's over and the change manager, eventually rolls off, they have a very clear understanding of how they're communicating and why they're contributing to it in a meaningful way. Also, when you're doing this, there might be features or functionality that you want to highlight. So communication plans I've seen are so high level and so broad, but maybe there's something that people are really used to using that's going to go away. So maybe it gets its own mini communication roadshow, or maybe there's something brand new that everyone's really excited about. Maybe there's some lunch and learns on that. There's different things that you can layer in as opposed to just a broad, we're about to finish user acceptance testing. We're about to start, T-minus 5 days to launch. You can have more meaningful communication. And also, that goes back to the culture. Has this person already had implementations before? Can you draw on what happened in the past? If you remember, it's going to be similar to XYZ project. The training might be set up similar to when you went through this implementation. So it makes people feel more comfortable because there may already be existing trust. And then, again, this should be tied to the project plans, to the status reports, to scope. If scope changes, then your change impact summary has to change. And every week in the status report, there should be a section for communication. This is who we communicated with last week or the last 2 weeks. Here's who we're communicating with in the immediate future. Here's what's coming down the road. Any changes to the change impact summary that are noted. So change management needs to be as dynamic as the project is. And to me, I see the change manager, the project manager, the business lead, and the business systems analyst sort of operating as one unit. Not sort of. Operating as one unit. Change management stops being a work stream then and becomes part of the project culture, which I think is so important. And here's the last one, expecting or misreading resistance. I am finding this more and more now. So I'm seeing a fundamental shift in resistance and resisting change as as the workforce matures from, the old guard, if you will, and pardon me if that's insensitive, to the newer guard, where change is just kind of part of what we do every day. How many of you, and you can put a 1 in the chat if you do this, read the developer notes every time you get a new update on your phone or Microsoft pushes out, and a 2 if you don't? Who reads the notes? I can tell you that I don't. Thank you to those who wrote in the chat. Thank you. Yeah, I don't either, because I just know I'm going to figure it out. And I'm not saying that means there's no resistance. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying change management doesn't have as much importance now as it did back, 20 years ago when it was first starting as a framework and there was a mountain of resistance to change. And I've experienced that. But I've also experienced the shift in that. And so I do think that it's important because there will be people who are really excited about the change. So when I get, younger generations coming in and they're using systems that are no joke built in the 80s, green screens, all that COBOL CICS, they can't wait for a new product. They can't get it soon enough. Better systems should lessen complexity. I agree with you. Absolutely. It should make it easier, more intuitive to do what it is that you need to do. 1 click for reports, things like that. Those are the things that you get to push for, absolutely. Now, what I have found is people are still nervous about the process, right? So they're excited about the change, but they're like, okay, but are we going to be clearly communicated with? Are we going to know? How do we know that you've built this right? When are we going to get trained? Those are real concerns. So when we were doing surveys on this large project, we would get high high degree of people being excited. So the percentage of people excited were really high. But then there were always the things that we said, what are you afraid of? It was always training, 100%. Are we going to get trained? How are we going to know this is coming? How are we going to know what's different? Well, those are easy conversations to have. When you work with your BSA and your project manager and your business lead, you have your change impact summary. You know what changes are coming. You're developing a training plan. You can get in front of that. That's not resistance. That's concern. And those are valid concerns. And then, of course, you have those that are fundamentally opposed to the change. And that's where, ProSci has its whole methodology on the different types of resistors and how you can overcome those. And I do think that that's really important. I'm finding that to be less, and I'm finding that the approach should match the people, not the assumption. So that goes back to really being able to fluidly move within the culture so you have your finger on the pulse of that. We had someone recently who was afraid that the new system was going to replace their job. And in an email to us, they actually said one tiny sentence, a little nervous about participating in the requirements gathering of a system that's going to replace me. Everybody missed that little sentence, except for the BSA. My business systems analyst was like, should we do something about that? And what I have found working with change management in the past is that would have gone through a whole hierarchical, we're going to have meetings, we're going to take it to a committee, how do we address this? I just took it straight to the business lead and said, hey, I can give you 4 reasons why that statement's not true. I can give you 4 reasons why they're going to have more work to do than ever once we go live with this new system, because new systems often actually increase workload for a period of time as you're implementing and going through with them. And there was a quick meeting spun up. It was a really nice back and forth. It was informal, but they could do that because that was their culture. Well, the change manager would never have been able to do that because the change manager didn't understand the culture there. It would have become a huge formal process, and then the message wouldn't have been received by the people who needed to receive it. And lastly, and this is not a fix, but sometimes it's just not optional. And we need to be okay with things not being optional. If the project is sound, that again goes back, we're solving the right problem with the right solution, then the tone has to come from the top. There was we were upgrading software for 23 universities who all had their own instance of PeopleSoft, and they had to get into a single instance and get upgraded together. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of resistance to this. And there was a meeting of the presidents, and the presidents were going back and forth. The presidents of the smaller universities were very excited because they needed the help. The presidents of the larger universities had a lot of sleek customizations that they might lose going to a consolidated system. So there was kind of this back and forth, and it was a question of, we don't know if we're in yet, we're not sure if this is right for us. And the chancellor stood before all of them and said, oh, I'm sorry. This is happening. We are not supporting 23 separate instances anymore. This is going live. So the conversation changes from whether to how. You're in. The question now is, how good do you want it to be? So that's not his quote. That's my quote for you. That's not the chancellor's quote. But we need change managers and project managers and business leads to help people be comfortable giving that message to end users. This is happening. We're not going to spend time debating that. What we're going to do is figure out the best way to deliver it to you. So come take a seat at the table and help us build it to make sure it's as good as it can be. You have a vested interest in this project being successful. So, in summary, I feel like these 4 roles really are one unit together. Your project manager, your change manager, your business systems analyst, and your business lead. When they are in meetings together, when they are working together, everyone has a vested interest in all of these, aligning on the problem, testing and validating, designing with the right experts, confirming the why and aligning the message, who's impacted and how, defining and embedding communication, supporting and sustaining adoption. Every single one of those roles is closely connected, or should be closely connected, to every single one of those activities or outputs. And that is where I've seen change management be very successful. And I have seen this. I have seen the project manager and the change manager really tied at the hip and actively working with the business systems analyst. having consistent meetings with those functional leads, those key stakeholders on the business side. And that's where I've seen, and then change management is scrappy. It's adaptable. And the change manager knows how to communicate because they have their finger on the pulse of what's really going on. They understand the culture. They're getting to know the people, not from a theoretical, not from a stakeholder list, not from a survey on what you're nervous about, but really seeing people in action. And I think that's where the most traction on change management is made. So if you work with change managers, if you're the project manager, if you're the business lead, here's my advice. Number one, of course, we just talked about that. Get them to better align. Make sure your change managers have a vested interest in the project, and they should even be ensuring who's in requirements gathering, who's in testing, who's in process design, leveraging that accidental change management and really leaning into the existing culture of an organization, filling in the gaps as needed. And this one is the most tactical one, but working sessions. I keep seeing change managers working in isolation, and I would love if they were building their documentation together in working sessions so people truly had an understanding of it, a buy-in for it, and the ability to use it. Like as soon as it's done, they're beginning to take action on it. And that's right, again, see, you're going to have the most traction with change management. So that is the end of the presentation. If there's, I didn't see any questions come through in the chat as we were going along. Do you think someone with a lack of emotional intelligence could perform a change management role? I think that they would struggle in that. I do think, and I've said actually, I think project managers struggle with that as well. My favorite quote of mine is, one of the most important traits of a project or a change manager is an understanding of and respect for human nature, and having that emotional intelligence. Now, I do think over time you can build that muscle following a framework and leveraging and learning from experiences. So I've worked on X number of projects, but what I would recommend, two parts to that, Jonathan, or two thoughts to that, Johnny. Number one, sometimes people who don't have emotional intelligence don't know they don't have emotional intelligence. So that's a tricky one, because then that you have to lean on those that are managing them and training them and working with them to help expose where they might have some gaps and where there's opportunities for improvement, and aligning them with people who do have that natural emotional intelligence or have learned it over time. And that's why I do like change management, is you can follow the framework. I think the framework is a great starter set. I think the framework is a really good way to grow that muscle, but you have to be actively invested in learning as you go, as opposed to just painting by numbers on every project. And I feel like sometimes that's where the divide is. How do you, I want to ask.
How do you keep change management and training in separate lanes?
See, boy, do I have context for that question too. I love that question, because I don't think they should be in separate lanes, except that it just depends on the person. So if you have a change manager who is only serving their framework, then it's very difficult for them to not try and get everyone to do things the way that they feel like things should be done. So if you have a savvy change manager who has emotional intelligence and is paired with a really strong training team, and in fact, I had the 4 circles of the 4 roles. Candidly, training should be in there as well. I think that they should be working together with respect for each other's different roles. But I would fully expect training to have a lot of input on change management deliverables, and I would expect change managers to help the training team really understand where do we need full training, because this is really new to people. This is a huge change for them. And where can we skinny down? Where is it some job aids, and maybe, it's a video that we're sending out. I think the combination of the business systems analyst, the trainer, and the change manager do that. Where that breaks down is when you have people who aren't fluid in their roles, and they're stuck in there's rigidity to it, and then there's none of that sort of natural symbiosis between the different roles. So that's a hard one, because I do think they should work together. Um, yes, let's see. I think it sounds very logical thing for change management to build their change management plans with PMs or with the team instead of in isolation. Why do they not? Okay, I'm going to tell you why they don't. Here's why I think why they don't. I think they don't personally, and this is my personal experience working with change managers, is that there's actually a little bit of a lack of understanding of project management, and a fear of exposure in working with different team members. I actually think change managers stay in isolations as almost a way to protect what they know, protect their framework, protect what they do, and keep it separate from the project. I think that if project managers and change managers worked more together and built things together, projects would be stronger. And I've seen that in action. There was a fabulous change manager that worked at an organization that both Jonathan and I worked at. And she was in lockstep with the project managers over time, several different project managers over different phases of the projects. And they became kind of a unit unto themselves. And it was much more successful with the two of them working together. I think I think over time there's been a lack of understanding about change management. So I think that change managers have also had to protect themselves a little bit. When you look at meetings, change management's always the last agenda item, and then often they get cut. So I feel like sometimes they don't feel like they're as important, and they have to fight for their seat at the table. I think that fight would become almost unnecessary if they embedded themselves more and became more a fluid part of the project. Yeah. Change management's often at the bottom, and you can have a 2-hour meeting and change managers get 10 minutes at the very end. I've seen that happen over and over. So then that begs the question, why does it last? Why is it its own section? Why is it its own section? Why is project and change, and training, why are those not, why are there not aspects of that along the whole way? And I think project managers have to, grow their respect for change management. But I think change managers have to work harder to be more integrated with change managers. Excuse me, with project managers and with the BSAs and with the business leads, not just from really beginning to understand the culture. Oops. Okay, well, now it worked. Great. All right. It's hopping around. Any more questions? All right. We're going to take a small break. I'm going to take a small break from webinars, but I did want to ask if there's anything that anyone would want to hear more about in future either webinars or videos or content. If there's anything here, and I'm going to go ahead. I was debating on putting this out, but this will just help me. I know it's a small audience here today, but this will help me. You can pick multiple of these. This kind of helps me plan out the next six to 8 weeks of things that I could be working on the side there as we continue to go out there and fix projects. I knew it. Someone just picked AI. All right. Yes, how to leverage AI, career growth. Risk management is a good one. I have a fun program for risk management that it's called A Room Full of Pipes. Okay, lots of love for AI. I knew that. All right, I figured that's what it was going to be. Okay, fantastic. I think we got everyone. So that brings us to the end of our webinar. So I do have everyone's email address here today, but again, we specialize in project rescue and turnaround, but also one-on-one training. So if there's ever any consultation that you want in terms of project management training, help on a specific project, we work one-on-one. We do special consulting. So would love to hear from anyone, see how we can help out there in the marketplace. Thank you so much for attending. And you get, look at that, so much shorter than last time. Jonathan and Pauline were there. You get 11 minutes of your day back.